I am a constantly curious person. I try to learn something new every single day, and that has been a lifelong journey of mine. I've even said to my grandchildren, on the day I am dying, teach me something new. You never know when you're going to use it.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok.
My guest today is Dr. Myke Merrill. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about him. 1, he regards the number one commodity of life to be time. So true. A person can replace energy, money, possessions, and just about every other aspect of life. But whatever you have spent your time on has got to be worth the investment. Time is not money. It is far more valuable. Let's not waste it frivolously. And 2, Dr. Myke regards the number one evidence of wealth to be clean water. Imagine that. Having clean water, an ability to read and write sensibly, and to make self-determined, wise decisions can be multiplied by intentional people throughout the world. He and his friends have built camps, schools, and churches in numerous places around the world, particularly in impoverished locations. He has written 28 books to make his wealth of knowledge and insights widely available. And 3, Dr. Myke has 2 mottos of life. 1, be constantly curious. Learn something about everything. Frequently use the expression, tell me more. And 2, I cannot do everything, but I can do something, so I will do that. Dr. Myke Merrill, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thank you, George. I was nodding along with your comments, and I thought that is really, really true. Oh, I wrote that, yeah.
Cat's out of the bag.
There we go.
Yeah. Every once in a while, we hear something that sounds great. Wait a minute, didn't I write that?
Thank you, George.
Yes, a wonderful background. 28 books, that's a lot of books. Damn, I got to get working on that.
Well, I started when I was about 19 or 20 years old, and because of the role that I had in my profession, I was writing manuals and instruction and how to work with people. And instead of just doing a seminar or some kind of a teaching program, I wrote it into a booklet, consolidated booklets, made them available, created a publishing company to get my stuff largely to have it copyrighted and then to be able to make that available. So it's really been a lifelong process. I say 28. I wrote a book for each of my children from the day we found out that we were pregnant with them until they were 21 years old. And I wrote a letter a month in longhand. And so I have 4 books of around 300 pages, maybe a little bit more, documenting everything that happened in our family and in their years of growing up. But those are private books, and I've done other materials as well, articles for magazines, that kind of stuff. But 28 specific books and resources.
Wow, that letter a day to your children. What a fabulous memento for them to have, a treasure to actually, they can read your thoughts, what you were thinking, and they might even think, gee, I guess Dad wasn't such a jerk after all.
Or they may actually conclude he really was a jerk, and here's the evidence of it. Yeah, could be either way. One of the things that I have found interesting is that they have read each other's books on critical events that occurred in our family or in one of their lives, that they could read how I perceived that or experienced that in other books as well. So they cross-reference across the 4 books that I have for them. So it was fun for me to begin with. And part of the discipline of writing And again, I can't do everything, but I can do something. So if I couldn't write an entire letter today, I look at the 29 lines and I think, I don't have time, but I could write a paragraph. I can't do everything, but I can do something. So that philosophy, I'm walking along the street and I see garbage blowing along. I say, look at all the garbage in my town. I can't do everything, but I could do something. And so I could pick that one piece up, and that just became a philosophy of life more than social help or way to get through the day. It really becomes a philosophy of life.
And that is a powerful philosophy to have. I can't do everything, but I can do something, whatever the challenge one is facing in life. And I'm thinking of a colleague who's recently started running, and he started by just running a few minutes a day and then adding an extra minute every day. Right. 1 minute, that's all he's adding. That's all he's just trying to do every day so he can do a little bit more. And there's so much, and certainly when it comes to writing, the same practice can apply. And if we could only encourage more people to write their thoughts more often, perhaps for themselves to review, but even to share with others.
Right. That's true.
Powerful. And I'm thinking of, I wish I had done that writing for my kids when they were small, and maybe we would better understand each other now.
One of the things that is fascinating about that is I understand myself better, because myself as a 25-year-old father of one and myself as a 71-year-old grandfather of 14 I'm a completely different person. And so I can look back and appreciate, but also examine critically the various events that I'm now doing in light of where I've come from. This whole effort came because my parents died young. My mother got cancer when I was 11. She died when I was 15. She was 42. My father remarried very shortly after my mother died. My stepmother, wonderful person, part of my life for over 60 years, but my father committed suicide a couple of years later, and I have no evidence of what kind of people they were, what their values were, why they went to college, why they got the degree, nothing. I know nothing about my own parents. They left no letters. They left no evidence of their maturity or their process. How did my mother feel about getting cancer? And nothing, just absolutely nothing. So the challenge was, if something were to happen to me, it didn't, but things did happen, but I didn't die from them. If something had happened that resulted in my death, how would my children know who I was? And so I wanted to leave some kind of evidence that even if a letter was partly written, they would be able to see who their dad was, what made me myself, and contributed as a platform of their life. Certainly is not the avenue they have to walk, but it's a platform on which they stand. And they've appreciated that. They've been very responsive to that.
And I see a lot of benefit in that. And curious enough, I've started writing my life story for my kids and their kids.
Absolutely.
And Myke, one of the points you raised in your book is you talked about how we see reality.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what is this thing that we call reality?
That is a tremendous philosophical question, but it's also a biological question. How every human being perceives the reality in which they are personally immersed. There is a reality of what's happening in some star somewhere 400 light years away. The reality is that's not a part of our reality. But when I'm driving along and somebody cuts me off, that is part of my reality. And the question then is, how do I perceive that moment? Is that an aggressive moment, or do I have compassion in that moment? Is it somebody who just wet their pants and are trying to get to a bathroom really badly and they're not thinking about anything else? Or did they just get fired from work and they're pretty much at the end of their rope? I mean, I don't know what's going on, but my reality is the journey I'm on. So as I did a significant amount of counseling, I still do. I work as a leader and as a engager with a lot of people across all spectra of life. And one of the things that I found in the models that were provided to me by people in executive positions above me and those who were my associates is they tended to be reactionary without thinking through what's real about this situation, not only from my perspective, but from others as well. So I began this journey of writing that book, Why Do People Act That Way, about 25 years ago, in terms of trying to explain to counselees, to clients, to coworkers, and to people I was equipping for a major event, how to actually understand primarily emotion. That was the big mystery. Somebody came to me years and years ago and say, I don't like working with kids because kids are emotional. And I said, what do you mean by emotional? And the person literally said, well, when a kid comes up to you and goes, I've had it. I just turn and walk away. It's like, but what does that mean? Well, it means they're emotional. What was the emotion? I don't know. Who can figure that stuff out? And I thought to myself, I can't do everything, but I can do something. I can figure out what emotion is because I had an intuitive way. From junior high school, I was the punky kid with long red hair that girls and boys would come and tell me what was going on in their family. And I learned even back then as a 11, 12, 13-year-old to be able to say, wow, tell me more about that. They solved their own problems. I didn't have to solve anybody's problems. I went into counseling basically on the essence of, here's what you just said. What does that mean? Tell me a little bit more about that. What are some solutions? That's all I ever did. But as they described their own emotions, on occasion, I would say, do you have a different word for that? And they would slide sideways, trying to capture, well, I wasn't really spitting angry. I was kind of like pooping angry. Okay, let's narrow that down a little bit. Well, I don't know. It's like rage. I was like burning. So now they have some other words. I listened to that. I didn't document verbatims from clients or friends, but I began recording how do the emotions sit and how do they associate. And so I began to develop, and I had pages and pages of emotions, but eventually I began to realize, I got 5 major pages here. And I began to consolidate that over probably a 10-year period and began experimenting. When I was a very young kid, I used to caddy for golf and at my family's golf club. And I would get huge tips because I would be caddying for Dr. So-and-so, Dr. Smith, and he would hit underneath a bunch of pine trees. They were always doing that. But he'd pull out his 9-iron or his 3-iron and he'd hit a shot and it would go a certain place. Then I'd be caddying for lawyer so-and-so later on. He'd be in the same spot. And I'd say, Dr. So-and-so used his 3 club, went underneath those branches. He didn't try and chip that thing out. He did that. I'd get a $5 tip. That's back in 1963. And because they were always competing to kill each other. And so I would watch what club one person used and recommend that to somebody else. In counseling, I would say, I was talking to a lady a while back, and she was really spitting angry as well. But she used the word competitive. And I'm in a competition. How does competition line up with this? And then people would be, wow, that's exactly what it is. I need to win this. I need to beat them down. And they'd use all these angry words, but it would be in the realm of sports or war or something like that. And I began to realize that's how people perceive what is real and what's going on inside of them. So basically, my doctoral work was documenting that process, developing the 5 basic emotional system, and then from there, it spread out to really what I now call reality intelligence, which is the whole big picture.
Myke, what I think I'm hearing there, tell me if I got it right, is that anger is sort of a form of competition?
Competition is sort of a form of anger. They're actually both part of the same system, which I call empowerment. That was the hardest emotional system to title because every word I came up with was almost immediately perceived by hearers as, oh, that's negative. It's bad. I don't want to be mad. I don't want to be angry. That you go to anger management to control your anger. I say, well, anger is not a bad emotion. Oh, so you're saying anger is good. I'm not saying anger is good. Well, anger is either good or bad. No, there's a third option. Anger is neutral. What it does to you and what you do with it is what creates good or bad. And so the challenge then was to come up with truly neutral terminology that didn't set a person off. Oh, yeah, I want to be loving. Well, loving cocaine is not necessarily a good thing. Loving to hurt people is not necessarily a good thing. So the love in and of itself is not automatically good. Being angry at injustice to you, or much more to marginalized people, that's a good thing. If you lose that anger, what happens in the world? Injustice continues unabated. And so the anger itself is not the problem. And coming up with a way of titling it really had to do with finding as neutral an expression as I could. I tried quite a few, but I came up with empowerment. And even the idea of empowerment is seen by some as, oh, that's what you do to women and Black people, like empower them. And I hear really negative response. Then others are, oh, empowerment, that's really what I want in my life. And that's really, really good. But most people would say, empowerment, tell me about that. That's the response that I wanted. So as I looked at the scale between mild, moderate, and intense emotions, none of which are bad, none of which are good, it's just there are factors, how much energy you put into it, how much it means to you, what you are driven to accomplish, from very low, mild, it doesn't really matter to me, moderate, this really matters to me, intense, I'm going to die over this. This is the hill I die on. So there's all 5 emotions have that same scale. So as I went through that, it was actually playing softball. And I was watching my son, who's now 45, he was about 18 or 19 at the time. And he had struck out 2 or 3 times or had a fly out or whatever, just not his normal game. He's usually a good ball player. And he got up to the home plate to hit his 3rd or 4th time. And I looked at the scowl on his face. His brow was down. His eyes were glaring. His cheek muscles were flexing. He's gripping the bat. And I thought, this guy he's out to kill. He is furious. This guy is totally enraged. He gets up. The pitcher pitches. He hits a ball slicing out to right field. It hits the ground in fair territory and zooms out to the right. The guy goes scooting for it. Matthew is immediately celebrating. His face is bright. His hands are up. Everybody's cheering. I thought, wait a minute, where'd the anger go? What happened there? Well, it was competition. And he was competing against himself in light of the team. And so I realized competition, determination, drive, those are also factors that are sisters to anger and rage. So a few years ago, there was a basketball finals. I don't remember the details. I could look it up at the basketball finals. And the semifinal game was between teams in 2 cities, NCAA semifinals. And the team that won had riots. They were burning buildings, flipping cars. It was crazy stuff. And people are going, they won. It was why in the world would they be so angry? They were competitive, and that was the first time that team had gotten into the finals. The other team had been in 16 times or whatever. To them, winning or losing, no big deal. We just have banners from years and years past. But the team that was a singular, unique event in their history, their competitive drive shifted over into anger and destruction, because they're really sisters in the same family. And so you find people working on a project and they become highly competitive, and then they blow up over nothing. It's like, where did that even come from? Well, I put anger and competition as associates in the same, and they can both get more intense, but to jump from one to the next is not a hard thing to do.
Myke, does that mean that if we're feeling angry at something or somebody, can we channel that anger more constructively if we somehow convert it to a competitive action?
It actually can be done that way. And I have, instead of trying to manage anger, I've said to people, I know you've been assigned by the court or your boss to go to anger management seminars. How about if we go to anger harnessing, not anger management? We're not going to try and manage this. We're going to try and harness it. So instead of calling it anger, let's just call it your fire cell. This is your fire cell. Are we going to burn or are we going to cook? Same fire, but we get to decide. So a person says, well, I just feel this boiling up in me and I don't know what to do with it. I say, okay, if you don't know what to do with it and I do know what to do with it, let's practice how to harness that energy. And it's just transformative to people because the language is push it down, extinguish it, drive it out, try and cut it into pieces and manage it. Anger, the rage you're feeling, is a great competitive drive that we can utilize towards your project. What are good techniques to take that anger power, that energy, and utilize the very same energy, not against the enemy, your coworker, but against the enemy, the frustration of this project? And now you can direct it and people go, so I don't need to kind of be a nice guy all the time. And well, that's an interesting way of phrasing it. So tell me more about that. What does it mean to be a nice guy? And people talk themselves into the solution. That's what I have found. And I do that from running events for thousands of people down to individual conversations over the price of eggs in the store. People get furious over price of eggs. I was talking to a guy just last week. He goes, I want to take these eggs and just pitch them down the way here. I said, that has nothing to do with this store. Tell me about that. What will that do for you if you take those eggs and throw them down through the store? What does that do for you? And what will happen as a result? And it was really interesting because I could see him calm down as he thought about options. I could see the rage become frustration. And then it became annoyance. And I thought, we're getting somewhere because now at being annoyed, he can do something about that. At rage, he's losing it. So for me, the whole empowerment system is about power and change. I want to get control of something that I don't believe I have control of. So instead of saying control your boss or control your employee, what I say is control what's happening inside of you and make that work for you. Don't let that horse go wild. Let's get a harness on that thing and make it work for you. And that changes everything.
And I'm fascinated by that concept. So I want to control my boss. I want to control my employee, but I can't control them. I might be able to influence them. What I can control is what I think and do.
And that really is a self-privilege or a self-permission to be able to say even such things as the flexing of my muscles in my neck, my shoulders, and my hands. So I'll say to somebody, I notice that as we're talking right now, you're clinging your hands, you're doing this kind of thing, you're switching your fingers back and forth, even while we're talking. They say, I didn't even know I was doing that. So here's one of the ways you can take your anger, the rage that's going on inside of you, and put your hands flat on the desk and say to your hands, calm down. And what they're actually doing is saying to themselves, I'm in control of me. And when they do that, and then I've said that, say, now that's one tiny bit of evidence that you actually are in control of yourself. As you're angry at your boss, your employer, or the project, you're losing the control of yourself in that moment. What I want you to do, put a harness on that beast and have that become, I feel my hands clenching even in the middle of a meeting, I can say, calm down, hands. And it calms all of you down. Now you can focus. I'm not saying give up the project. Become a nice guy and say, okay, I know this is really important to you, so I'll just yield. I'm not saying that that's the solution. What I'm saying is, if the rage is becoming destructive, you can manage that. You can harness that. If the rage is actually empowering you to do something about it, a child you see swept into a culvert, and you are furious that the city didn't take care of the water system, blah, 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 your immediate rage will allow you to plunge into that water, grab that kid, and with superhuman strength, hold him out and say, I have no idea how I did that. I was like, all of a sudden the kid's out of the water. And it's like, how did I even do that? It was your empowerment that did it. And you harnessed it into an activity that became a solution instead of a destruction. So you can do it. You can do that.
So I take it that when someone does something destructive, the defense that, well, I couldn't help myself, I was emotional, it doesn't count. That doesn't work.
I would say, so tell me more about that, because I don't know if it worked or didn't work. The problem with my drawing a conclusion immediately is I've answered that person's questions for them, but I want them to discover the answers for themselves to be able to utilize that understanding of reality better and better as they go on. So instead of my saying, so the destruction really wasn't a very good choice, was it? Obvious answer is, no, I'm sorry. And you didn't get anywhere. You didn't get anywhere at all. Say, so tell me what it felt like to destroy the project, to flip the table over, or whatever it is. I don't care what it is. To do the destruction. Tell me what that felt like to you. I don't know. I kind of lost myself. That's interesting. Most people don't really lose themselves. It's almost you're covering over your action with a bit of shame because you think that I'm going to be negative about that. I'm not negative about that. This could have been a good thing. Why did Rosa Parks not get up from that bus seat? Why did she not do that? Because she was tired. No, she was pissed and angry that nothing was changing, no matter what rules they put into place. So she was not allowed to strike out. A black woman in 1955, she can't strike out. Martin Luther King could scream and rant and rave and be very, very angry. Apparently, Rosa Parks wasn't able to do that. But her frustration was driven into the action of, I'm not moving no matter what you do. And it destroyed a well-accepted system in her singular action that thousands and thousands of other people had done. But she became the trigger that launched that whole thing going on. What I'm saying is the destruction itself may not necessarily automatically be bad. What I'm saying is, what did it do to you? Now, what do you do with that? And I don't have to answer those questions. The person is going to grapple with, even in the moment. I talk to husbands and wives that are fighting, throwing things at each other. And I've said, in the moment, he just threw a plate at you and missed. What does that do to you? It makes me laugh. He's such a bad shot. And of course, he's getting angrier and angrier and say, well, that's an interesting comment. What does that do to you, to the husband? Well, it embarrasses me because I used to be a good ball player, and now he's like, I'm 14 years old again. So now I'm thinking, this is really, there's some roots that go really down deep here. I want them to talk about what's going on instead of throwing plates at each other. So the throwing of the plate, which was destructive, actually became a good insight to get us to the next level. Was it bad? No. The reality is it happened. What does that do to you? What can I do about that? Now we're getting somewhere.
Myke, by definition, our emotions are not rational. They're emotional. How or what can we do on a daily basis to better channel our emotions?
I don't see emotion as devoid of rationality. When I did my doctoral work on 5 basic emotions, one of my chapters was the definitions I was using. I went to my professors and I said, no one agrees as to what an emotion is. From Freud to Rogers to Aristotle, nobody seems to even know what an emotion is. And one of my professors said, so tell me what your research found out. I said, I found this and this. Everybody's got different definition. Open any dictionary, you're going to find totally different definition. And the professor said, in theology, in politics, and that's the same situation. So you define your term the way you are going to use it, and then stay consistent to that. That's what your chapter 3 is about, your definitions chapter. You define emotion and then stay with that consistently. I said, okay, I'll do that. So for me, emotion is the link between perceptions and motivations that is either a reaction or a response to how I understand what is happening. So it could be, quote, purely emotional, but as soon as you say emotion is emotional, you've given absolutely no definition at all. White is very much whitish. What is white? That stink is really stinky. Okay, help me a little bit more. Emotion is really emotional. And the reality is everything's happening in your brain. You have deep-seated memories, you have perceptions, you have insight, you have adrenal glands that are triggering certain hormones in your body. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are going on. We can really understand all of that. If a person, I define emotion, it's not exclusively this way, but a starting point is it's either a reaction or a response. A reaction is unplanned, spontaneous, and usually less or uncontrolled. A response is reasonable, mature, experienced, and has a plan. They're both emotional. They're both emotion. Emotion is both sides. But if you have a reaction, can you shift that to a response? Can you say, I know I just gave you the finger because you pulled in front of me. Let me back that up just a little bit because I'd like to take a different course here. Or you're in an argument with your management team in your business and some new startup comes in with some wild idea and you immediately trash the person, not the idea. And to be able to say, that was my reaction. And to be able to say, I just reacted there and I don't want to do that. Let me pull that back and let me respond, not react. Both of those are emotional. Both are intense. It really matters what we're talking about here, but I'm going to respond instead of react. So emotion for me became either the reaction or the response, linking my perceptions to my motivations. And they're interactive. So it's a part of the big picture.
If we want to be better responders instead of reactors, is that something we train ourselves to do before the emotion?
Yes or no. And it's interesting. I don't want to pick at your words, George. The reality is when a person starts a sentence with if, I immediately say, do you not want to do that? You're not interested in doing that? Because you said, if we want to be better at dealing with, well, since we want to be better at our emotion, or when we want to improve. For me, and I'm not the guru of this, and I certainly haven't perfected it. For me, the moment I react in a way that I disappreciate, I don't even know if that's a word. I don't have a strong appreciation for what I just did. It was a reaction. Can in that moment, for me, maturity is, I want to take that back. Please disregard what was just said in the court. We're not going to fight. I want to take that back, and I would like to respond differently. Is that okay with you? And I've said that to family members. I've said it to people that I work with. And to be able to say, in the moment, I realized I just reacted bluntly, and I want to be able to adjust that. So I'm going to ask permission for that to happen. And I've had people say to me, I've been doing this a long time, and I still react instead of respond. And I've had people say to me, you can't unring a bell. You're right. You're absolutely right. Tell me more about that. I turn around, get them to talk about that. I mean, so tell me more. Well, that's the way you reacted, or that's the way you acted and responded. It was not a response. I just want to make it clear. It is the way I reacted. It was not the way I respond. Can you at least give me that? Okay. All right. And I'm teaching the methods right on through the whole process. Now, I've been doing this a long time, so I know how to be able to approach those situations. I know what words to listen for and how to address those particular words. There's certain words that I'm on a campaign to eliminate from our language. And so when I hear them, I pull them up and I say, I'm on a campaign to eliminate the use of those words. Let's find another way of saying that. The 4 words that I am on a campaign to eliminate are need, should, ought, and must. And then some other related, gotta, have to, supposed to, a bunch of words. But need, should, ought, and must, they just flow out of my mouth fairly easily. Need, should, ought, and must. I have on a campaign for myself, and as much as I can help others, eliminate the use of need, should, ought, or must. Politicians, preachers, parents, teachers, pundits, they all use need, should, ought, and must. You know what we need to do? What we really should do? What we ought to do? You know what we have to do? And it becomes words creating obligation that absolutely no one is going to do. We know we're not going to do it. It just sounds really intense and authoritative to be able to say what we need, should, ought, and must do. Nobody's going to do it. So when I hear that, I hear, you know, what we need to do in pick any topic. Doesn't really make any difference what it is. What we need to do is, you just used one of my forbidden words, need. What can we do? Better than can, what will we do? And when will we do it? And people go, well, I don't know what we can do. Okay, well, let's shift our conversation from what we need to do to what we can do. Well, what we ought to do. No, you just use another word. What we ought to do. It's not what we ought to do. We have no obligation. It's not a debt. What can we do? Let's address the situation. And now what can we do, either together or alone, to bring about a result that we really want? How do we respond instead of react? And it's changed corporations. It's changed family structures. It's changed the way an event is transgressing, even while it's happening, to be able to have, let's slow down, let's change our language, let's address this in a different way. And that seems to work, seems to be very helpful.
Myke, for people who'd like to know more about the ideas in your book, they can always get a hold of the book, Why Do People Act That Way? You also have a program that's coming out based on the book, and people can find that program. Where will they be able to find that?
Eventually, I have right now somebody working on drmyke.com. I spell Myke with a Y, not an I. drmyke.com is my website, and for speaking engagements, for resources, materials, all coming on there. I do have the website, whydopeopleactthatway.com, a lot of words. I took the initials, WDPATW. That's out there. I tried to buy up a whole bunch of stuff. I'm changing the concept from why do people act that way to reality intelligence. People have heard about emotional intelligence, and that's 1/4 of how we actually experience reality. We have perceptions, we have emotions, we have motivational drivers, and we have behaviors. And those 4 complexes are interactive so that if we choose to act or we choose not to act, it changes our emotion. It can bleed it off or make it worse. The issue is not every time I act out my anger, it gets worse. No, sometimes it actually relieves it. Every time I don't act out my anger, it makes it better. No, sometimes it makes it worse. So the issue is not which one mechanically accomplishes a specific outcome, it is look at the interactions, ask 2 questions, which I ask over and over. What is this doing to me? What do I do with that? So then instead of saying, when you don't express your anger, you choose a behavior of disengagement. What does that do to the anger itself? Well, for me, it makes it worse. I end up boiling. I cry myself to sleep. I don't eat for 3 days. I grind my teeth. Okay. So you have a bunch of factors from disengaging your action. If you engage your anger, what happens to you? Now we're getting somewhere. So it's not that it makes it worse or better. It can stimulate it, but it also can help you name it. Now, if you can name it, we have a harness for that beast. That's exactly how it works. So I do consulting, I do training, I do all kinds of interventions, from phone calls to on-site 3-day workshops. I mean, everything. Because some situations have a complexity from either the participants or the nature of the environment that really does take a tremendous amount of work, not to solve or eliminate, but to harness. That for me, the concept of we have energy, we have situations, we have people with a lot of input here. Let's not sideline anybody, but let's harness those ideas and get a team of 12 or 20 or 80 or 500 working in the same line, accomplishing a common goal as best we can. We can't do everything, but we can do something. I mean, it comes back to life mottos. That's actually how I do everything I do. I can't do everything, but I can do something. So let's do that.
Myke, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could give advice to a team leader to help them better harness, and I started that sentence with if, darn, picked it up now. When in a situation,
even you are learning something.
Imagine that.
I love that, George.
When the team leader is working with leading their team, how might they better harness the emotional energy of the team to be more productive?
I have a concept that's my catalytic speech called conflictelligence. How to experience conflict from an intelligent approach. In conflictelligence, I'm spilling the beans here, so nobody's going to hire me now because they know the answers. This might help or might hurt. It doesn't matter. I recommend 3 steps. And these are the 3 steps I would recommend to any team leader who's in the situation you just described. They're all downers. Slow down, cool down, sit down. So you have a team leader. Things are contentious. They're not getting their team to work together. You want to go in and scream and rant and rave, throw things around, make some threats, fire somebody. You're like, I've got to do something today. Slow down. Slow the process down. Even if you say verbally, I was just about to pick one of you guys to fire, but I have got to slow this process down. So we're going to slow it down. Or it's the old count to 10 idea. I mean, I don't care how you do it, but to be able to say, here was what I am prone to immediately do. Give me a few seconds here I want to turn around slowly twice. I've been pitching softball for 52 years. On occasion, I get 3 balls and no strikes on a batter. I've told my catcher, when I get 3 balls and no strikes, roll the ball back to me. Roll the ball back. And what it requires for me is I slow down my process. I begin to understand who I am and where I am in a situation. I walk out to get the ball, and it gives me that extra time. So slow down. Cool down is not eliminate your anger, but instead of being enraged, be furious. Instead of being furious, be angry. Just step it down a little bit and act out of anger instead of rage. So cool down, and then finally sit down and say, we're standing up, we're dealing with this in the hallway. How about if we get a cup of coffee? Let's sit down and see where we go. Not I'm going to convince you. Let's just sit down. And when you change body position, it's almost like magic. It's not really magic. I understand a lot more about it. But changing your actual position brings about a result that is much closer to what you want instead of what you're going to get when the situation deteriorates as it's been heading down the room. So slow down, cool down, sit down, and you'll get somewhere.
Powerful advice. My guest today is Dr. Myke Merrill, reminding you that you can't do everything, yet you can do something.
If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.